Every empire believes its power will last forever, but history whispers a different truth. The world's center of power always shifts, and it never asks permission. Rome to Spain, Spain to Britain, Britain to America. And now the pattern repeats, quietly, methodically, from the United States to China. This isn't a prophecy, it's a pattern. And the last time the world saw it unfold this clearly was 1945. Imagine London at the end of World War II, victorious yet broken. The streets were cracked, the treasury empty, the people exhausted. Britain had won the war, but lost the world. Behind the smoke and confetti of victory parades, the empire's finances were collapsing. The very moment Britain celebrated survival was the moment America inherited its throne. Today, 80 years later, the same energy echoes across the Pacific. The U.S. stands where Britain once stood, proud, indebted, and stretched across too many battlefields. And China stands where America once did, industrial, hungry, and holding a stack of IOUs from the world's superpower. It's not about politics, it's about physics, the economic kind. Power moves like gravity, from the spent to the strong, from those who consume to those who create. And every empire, no matter how mighty, eventually faces the same test. Can it keep the crown it built, or must it pass it on? In this video, we'd all trace that handover, from the fog of London in 1945 to the skyscrapers of Shanghai today, and uncover why every empire S-century ends the same way, not with defeat, but with exhaustion. The same story, a new century, and a different flag rising in the same wind. Because the world doesn't end when an empire falls, it just changes addresses. Power isn't destroyed, it's transferred. Like heat or light, it moves to wherever the energy still burns brightest. In history, that energy has always meant one thing: productivity. The ability to create more than you consume. Rome built roads, Spain found gold, Britain built machines, America built the modern world. But the curve always bends the same way. When nations stop producing and start depending, their power begins to drift, silently, then suddenly. That's the invisible law of imperial physics. Creation attracts power, consumption repels it. Empires rise when they export innovation and values. They decline when they import everything else. In 19th century London, power smelled like coal and steel. In mid-20th century New York, it smelled like oil and credit. Today, in 21st century Shanghai and Shenzhen, it smells like silicon and ambition. Every shift begins quietly. No government meeting declares it. No leader signs the document that says our time is over. The decline shows up first in trade balances, debt charts, and the tone of late-night news anchors. The empire starts defending instead of building, debating instead of innovating, comforting itself with nostalgia instead of vision. And that's when history begins to whisper, it's happening again. Britain once looked at America the same way America looks at China now, half dismissive, half afraid. British politicians called America a reckless teenager with too much confidence and not enough culture. They laughed at its accent, mocked its optimism, doubted its discipline. But behind the laughter, they felt it, the shift. Factories in Detroit were roaring while London's were rusting. The pound was sinking while the dollar was rising. Britain was still the world's empire on paper, but in reality, it was America's creditor, its dependent, its echo. Empires rarely fall with a bang. They fade into the background of their successor's story. Britain didn't collapse. It aged out. And now, the same process has started again, a slow-motion exchange between Washington and Beijing. But to understand the present, we need to revisit the exact moment it happened last time. The day Britain Yes century quietly ended and America ES began. The year was 1945. Britain had survived the unthinkable. 6 years of war, bombings, rationing, and fear. The streets of London filled with celebration. The sound of victory echoed through radios and church bells. But beneath the noise, the empire's foundations were cracking. The treasury was empty. Half of London lay in ruins. The Royal Navy was still mighty, but the fuel to run it was borrowed. The British people had fought with unmatched courage, yet the cost of that courage was national exhaustion. Imagine walking through Piccadilly Circus in those months. The lights were back on, but barely. Britain had won the war, but at the price of its empire. What victory gave it in pride, debt took away power. In Washington, new maps were being drawn. The United States, untouched by invasion and overflowing with industrial might, had become the world's banker. Britain owed billions, not to conquerors, but to its ally across the Atlantic. The country that had once lent money to half the world was now asking for loans. Winston Churchill knew it. He once said, "We have not become the slaves of the Americans, but we have certainly become their dependents." The empire that had ruled the seas for centuries was now sailing under someone else's credit. It wasn't just money, it was confidence. Before the war, London was the financial heart of the planet. After 1945, the center shifted west to New York. The pound, once the world's reserve currency, was replaced by the dollar. The language of trade, finance, and diplomacy changed almost overnight. Britain's fall didn't happen because of defeat. It happened because of debt. War forced it to spend tomorrow's wealth on today's survival. When peace came, the bill arrived. And America, rich in factories and untouched cities, had both the money and the ambition to collect. By 1950, the torch had passed. The U.S. Navy replaced the Royal Navy on global patrol. The Bretton Woods system made the dollar the world's currency. The Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe, but in doing so, placed it under American influence. The empire that once commanded the world's trade now served as its advisor. And just like that, the British century quietly ended. Not with invasion, not with rebellion, but with a handshake and a loan. The transition was peaceful on paper, but behind the diplomacy, something deeper was shifting. Identity. Britain was no longer the center of the story, and the same silence now surrounds the United States. The quiet moment before the map changes again. History doesn't repeat, it reflects. And right now, the reflection in the mirror looks eerily familiar. America in the 2020s feels a lot like Britain in the 1940s. Still powerful, still proud, but tired. Its debts are high, its politics divided, its industries shrinking. The world still respects it, but increasingly, it no longer depends on it. China, on the other hand, has become what America once was, a producer, a lender, and a believer in its own destiny. Its cities hum with ambition. Its factories feed the world. Its leaders talk not about survival, but about replacing the status quo. For decades, America built, innovated, and led. China watched, learned, and adapted. The U.S. perfected the art of consumption. China mastered the science of production. And just as Britain financed America's rise through loans, America has financed China's rise through imports and debt. Consider this. In 1980, China's economy was smaller than Italy's. Today, it rivals America's in size, and in purchasing power, it's already larger. The yuan isn't the world's reserve currency yet, but it's creeping into trade deals once dominated by the dollar. The pattern is playing out again, line for line. Back then, Britain held the oceans. Today, America holds the data cables, the skies, the satellites. Back then, America's new world promised growth. Today, China's Belt and Road stretches across continents like the new Silk Road. Power is shifting, not in battles, but in balance sheets. But what's most striking isn't the numbers, it's the attitude. Listen closely, and you can hear the same language echoing across time. British commentators once dismissed American goods as cheap and inferior. Today, many Americans say the same about Chinese technology. British elites mocked the American work ethic as unsophisticated. Now, Western pundits scoff at China's 996 culture. History, as always, enjoys irony. The real danger is not that China rises, but that America assumes it can't fall. Britain made that same mistake. It believed its culture, its prestige, and its alliances were enough to protect it from economic gravity. But power doesn't care about nostalgia. It flows where the energy is. And today, that energy hums eastward. Factories that once stood in Ohio now stand in Guangdong. Research once led in Silicon Valley is being replicated in Shenzhen. The same shift Britain ignored in 1945 is now happening on America's watch. Only faster, more global, and amplified by technology. The transfer of power has already begun. But unlike 1945, this time there's no clear winner, and no clean handover. The transition between America and China isn't a passing of the torch. It's a tug of war in slow motion, and both sides are burning through their strength trying not to let go. The shift of power between nations doesn't happen in a single headline. It happens in statistics, policies, and quiet agreements that barely make the news. The US and China transition is already in motion. Not declared, but visible for anyone who knows what to look for. Let's start with debt, the silent weapon of the empire. When Britain lost control in 1945, it owed more money than it could ever repay. Today, the U.S. holds over $30 trillion of debt, and every year that number climbs. China, meanwhile, has become the world's largest creditor. It doesn't send soldiers overseas. It sends loans, infrastructure, and contracts. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China has financed ports, highways, and energy grids in more than 140 countries. Where Britain once built colonies, China builds partnerships, economic ones. It's not the age of invasion anymore, it's the age of integration, and with every deal signed, the balance tilts further east. Trade tells the same story. The United States once dominated world exports. Now it imports more than any nation on earth. For decades, China was the factory, America was the customer. But that simple exchange created an uncomfortable truth. The customer became dependent on the factory. Now, as Washington tries to decouple its supply chains, it's discovering how deeply tied the two economies have become. From smartphones to solar panels, pharmaceuticals to semiconductors, China sits at the heart of the modern economy's bloodstream. Cutting that link isn't surgery, it's amputation. Then there's technology. the new battleground of empires. In 1945, Britain's power rested on ships and colonies. America's on oil and industry. Today, dominance is measured in chips, AI models, and control of data. Silicon Valley was the empire's crown jewel, but Shenzhen and Hangzhou are catching up fast. Artificial intelligence, green energy, quantum computing, these are the new equivalents of railroads and battleships. Whoever leads in these fields will write the rules of the 21st century. And right now, both superpowers are racing toward that finish line with desperation disguised as confidence. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is quietly adjusting. Countries that once followed Washington now hedge their bets. Trade blocs like BRICS expand. The petrodollar faces competitors. Currencies once pegged to the US are being renegotiated. It's not rebellion, it's realignment. When Britain faded, it could still rely on America, a friendly power that shared its language, its culture, and its worldview. But America doesn't have that luxury today. China isn't waiting to inherit the system, it's building a new one. Parallel institutions, digital currencies, independent trade routes, an entire alternative world economy under construction. And every day that project grows, the old order weakens. The same shift that took a generation in 1945 could unfold in a decade now. Empires used to fall by cannon. Today, they fall by contracts, algorithms, and interest rates. The throne of global power isn't seized anymore. It's reprogrammed. Every collapse has a human side. Empires don't fall because of charts or treaties. They fall because the people inside them change. The citizens lose the qualities that once made their civilization strong, curiosity, sacrifice, unity, and replace them with comfort, distraction, and division. In post-war Britain, this looked like ration lines and resignation. The generation that had fought for survival turned inward. The young no longer dreamed of colonies. They dreamed of stability. The empire's end wasn't T-marked by rebellion or revolt. It was marked by exhaustion. People simply stopped believing in the story that once defined them. Now look at America. Decades of abundance have created a strange emptiness. The same society that once prided itself on invention and exploration now battles apathy and polarization. Every major empire, at its end, loses its common purpose. Rome argued about bread, Britain about class, America about ideology. Different eras, same distraction. When national identity fractures, so does confidence. The middle class shrinks, institutions lose trust, and the idea of sacrifice feels outdated. The empire that once inspired the world begins to question itself, and that uncertainty is contagious. It spreads faster than inflation, faster than debt. It seeps into art, politics, and conversation. For ordinary people, decline doesn't feel like collapse. It feels like confusion. Prices rise, jobs change, headlines contradict each other. The world feels faster, angrier, harder to recognize, and in that fog, nostalgia becomes the last refuge. Make it like it was, every empire whispers, not realizing that the past it misses was already the beginning of its fall. In China, meanwhile, the energy is reversed. Their society still believes its best days are ahead. You can feel it in their architecture, their pace, their willingness to sacrifice. They are in the phase every rising power goes through. The belief stage, the builder's mindset. It's the same feeling America had in the 1950s, and Britain had in the 1850s. Empires trade not only goods and money, they trade emotion. One grows weary as the other wakes up. One sighs, the other hungers. That's how history moves forward. The human cost of decline is not poverty, it's disorientation. A sense that the story no longer makes sense, but the next story is already being written elsewhere by those still willing to believe in their future. And that's the truth every empire forgets. Power isn't taken from you, you simply stop holding it. If the 20th century belonged to America, the 21st belongs to transition. Not war, not peace, transition. The same uncertain twilight Britain lived through after 1945 now stretches across the modern world. The flags have changed, but the feeling is the same. Every empire reaches a point where it must decide what kind of legacy it wants, domination or renewal. Britain chose to become an ally and advisor to the next superpower, to trade empires for influence. That decision gave it dignity in decline. America faces a similar choice now. It can fight the inevitable, or it can shape it. Because the truth is this, the end of dominance doesn't mean the end of relevance. The world still needs what America was built on, creativity, openness, courage. But those values must evolve. The next century will not be owned by one flag. It will be shared by networks, technologies, and ideas. China's rise is not the villain of the story. So to assess the next verse in the same song, a civilization returning to the stage after a long silence. The question isn't whether China deserves the throne. The question is whether humanity can finally outgrow the idea that there must only be one. Maybe that's the real evolution of the empire, from ownership to partnership, from supremacy to cooperation. The old cycle of rise and fall could give way to something different, balance. But history has yet to prove that possible. If we follow the 100-year rule, America is reaching its century mark. The signs are all there: debt, division, fatigue, and the rise of a new contender. But there's one variable history never accounts for: awareness. For the first time, a superpower can look in the mirror and recognize the pattern before it's too late. The question is, will it? Empires die in denial, but they survive through reinvention. The next chapter hasn't been written yet, and that is the opportunity hidden in decline. Because endings in history are never really endings, they're transformations. So as the world watches this shift from west to east, maybe the lesson isn't about who wins or loses. Maybe it's about learning to rise without repeating the same fall. If you made it this far, you're part of the rare few who see the pattern while it's still forming. The next video will uncover what happens after the handover, how new powers reshape the world, and what signs will tell us when the next cycle begins. Stay curious, because the empire never ends. It just changed its name.